Hi, my name is Heather, and I'm here on this lovely day to tell you a story, a personal testimony from my life about how losing my son brought me to God. And it's a testimony I've told multiple people at times, but it's about time I told everybody else. In 2004, I was married and had trouble conceiving. It was difficult because, we were ready to start a family, me and my husband at the time. So I had a procedure known as an ovarian drilling. And an ovarian drilling is rather painful, but it did the trick. And within weeks, we got pregnant. So you can imagine how thrilled we were after months and months of trying to finally be able to have a baby. And how thrilled I was to find out it was a boy. I love my girls that I had after him, but I grew up with a sister, so my family, my mom and my dad had never had a little boy, so I felt really pleased to be able to give that to them. When Tommy came out, he had some issues, but he was beautiful. He really was. And so they kept him in the NICU for a while. And when I was finally able to bring him home, it was amazing to be able to be a mom and to be able to share that time with him and be able to love him and to finally have a child, which I always wanted. When they sent him home, they told me that he was doing well and that there wouldn't be any more problems. But at a doctor's visit soon after, I could see he wasn't gaining weight the way he was supposed to. And so, even though the doctor said it was normal, I still worried about it. So one day, I brought my son to the emergency room and they told me that there was something seriously wrong. Nobody could really tell me what it was, just that he had problems digesting and that his liver enzymes were off. So they got it to a point where he started gaining weight and they sent me home on liver meds. And a few months after that, they took him off because they felt he was doing so good he didn't need them. That was about the time that my relationship started to tank. I think my husband, I don't know if he got jealous of the amount of time I was spending with my son because we had to feed him literally like every 2 hours because of his digestive problems, or if it was the start of his bipolar kicking in, or I don't know to this day, but it caused issues. So I remember one night, me and Tommy had moved in his grandmother's house because it was empty. And I remember trying to work on things with my husband and him leaving that night and thinking that it was never going to last. And the only thing I had at that point was my son. The only thing I wanted at that point was my son. And I remember looking at him and thinking, as long as I have you, everything's going to be okay. Fast forward a couple weeks later, this was back in 2004 when the hurricanes came, and I noticed a spot on my son's tummy, nothing big, right? And I took him to the doctor for it, like a mom should, and they told me he was in liver failure. So we drove over to Shands Hospital, and we used to walk him around Shands Hospital in this little buggy because it was the only thing that seemed to make him stop crying. It seemed to make him feel better. He had a horrible vein, so when they tried to draw blood, it was pretty traumatic. But at the entire time, I managed to keep my positivity. I just knew that they would do a liver transplant and that he would be fine and he would come home. Sorry, this part makes me emotional. He didn't. One night, after a procedure, he was laying there and I was talking to a nurse and all of a sudden his breathing stopped. And I can remember it clear as day how the nurse reached over and pulled that stupid code blue cord that seemed to go off for every other child by mistake. But for my son, it went off on purpose. I collapsed in the hallway and they brought him back and they moved him to intensive care. And then proceeded days of watching code over and over. But finally the doctor came out and told us that that his heart couldn't take it anymore. So he walked in, and I held him, and I said goodbye. It took a total of about 45 minutes for me to do so, and by then I had been walking with him for a total of like 24 hours, trying to keep him quiet and happy, and was going on like 30 hours of no sleep by the time I had to say goodbye. So I don't remember a lot of what I said, only that I tried to pack a whole lifetime full of memories into 45 minutes. But while we were waiting for him in intensive care, the chaplains came in and they told me a story about Abraham and Isaac, and about how, if you don't know the story, Abraham was told by God to sacrifice Isaac, who was his only son, and he took him up on the hill to do so. But when he did, God provided a ram instead, so he didn't have to sacrifice his son. He sacrificed something else instead, and his son was able to come home with him. After my son died, I kept replaying that story over and over in my head. Up until then, I wasn't a Christian. I didn't know God. But that story haunted me. And the only thing I got out of that story was that God took my son because I love my son more than I love God. And if you are someone who doesn't believe in God or doesn't have a relationship with him, and you're told a story like that when you're losing your child, it does things to you. That's what you get out of it. You get the fact that God isn't loving. And so I struggled. At Tommy's memorial, I sat there in the memorial, and the preacher later tried to come over and pray with me. And I looked at her, and I said that I don't want to hear it. I stopped her in the middle of her prayer, and I told her I didn't want to hear it. I didn't. I was so mad at God for taking that son I thought he had given me. Anyways, let's wait till this boat goes by. But anyways, finally, after the memorial, my grandmother chose to come up to me and talk to me. And I had never really thought about the fact that she had lost her own son at a year old named David. And she told me that she had prayed to God that if David was in heaven, that she receive a sign. And her sign was a son born on Christmas. And it took years and years for my grandmother, but she went on to have 5 kids, and 4 were girls. But the middle one was my Uncle Noel. And you can guess why he was called Noel, because he was born on Christmas. And my grandmother said it was like this huge weight was lifted from her, and she knew that David was in heaven, and she knew that she got her answer. So on the way to the memorial, we had seen this little crab in the hallway. My mom and my dad and my sister were staying beachside, and I was staying with them, and we left their hotel, and as we did, this little crab was in the hallway. And so in my messed up, grieving mind, I thought maybe if God was giving me a chance to save this crab because I wasn't able to save my son, right, then maybe I could save something. And so I went to save this crab. I went to get him, and he crawled under a door that said authorized personnel only. And I wasn't able to save him too. And just made me feel worse. But after the memorial, when I came home, I listened to what my grandmother had told me, and I went out to pray on the patio of that hotel. And I stood out there and I asked God that if Tommy was in heaven, and that if I hadn't done anything wrong as a mom, that I received some type of sign, because it was eating me up inside, As a new mom, when you don't know what you're doing and your child dies, you automatically blame yourself, you know? Maybe I didn't feed him enough. Maybe I didn't feed him right. Maybe I did this wrong. Maybe I did that wrong. And that's sort of where I was at. I didn't understand why God would give me a child and then take him away. So I prayed that night that if there was a reason Tommy was taken, and that it wasn't because I was a bad mom, that I get a sign. And I guess God knew that I couldn't wait years, like my grandmother. Because I came back inside the room from the patio, and I went to look for my husband out in the hallway. And as I opened the door, sitting in the hallway was the same little crab from earlier. At least it looked exactly like him. And he was just sitting there like he was waiting for me. And so I got a towel and I wrapped him up. And as I held him and went outside to the beach, it reminded me of the way I had held Tommy. And as I brought him down to the beach and I let him go, I knew, like I had this feeling of overwhelming joy, and I knew that that was my answer. I knew that God took Tommy for a reason. I knew he didn't consider me a bad mom, and even more than that, I knew that God existed, and that he loved me, and that he was trying to comfort me. And I'll tell you, it was the start of a relationship with God. Granted, it's taken me years to get close to him, but it was the start of a relationship, and I knew without a doubt that I couldn't deny that he existed. That actually, a little while after that, my mom pointed out to me that the last time we had ever seen Tommy, we had been doing laundry at the hospital. And the last outfit we ever put him in was his little crab outfit. God has a reason that he does these signs sometimes. Sometimes they're meant to be meaningful. Years later, I discovered why the situation had to be what it was, why it was a crab that went under a door that said authorized personnel only, and why he showed up after the memorial. It's because it was a representation of my son, you know. My son went someplace that I wasn't authorized to go. And I wasn't able to get to him because he was authorized to be there and I wasn't. And it hurt. But with time, my son came back. And I think that was a representation that someday I will see my son again. And that is what I needed to see most of all at that moment. I needed to know that my son was not gone for good. And I got that. God gave me that at a time when I most needed it. Now, fast forward, there were a lot of other signs too that occurred at that time. A lot of them having to do with crabs, because that became my new sign from God that he loved me, was that little crab, you know. So if I was feeling sad, I would walk through a grocery store and some kid would have left a crab toy on the top of the cakes I was walking by. Or there were other signs too. Tommy used to have this little bear that played somewhere over the rainbow that my mom had gotten him from the hospital gift shop where she worked. And we were at a concert not long after my son died. We went hoping that we would feel better. And we were both feeling really depressed. It's like being at the concert was just a reminder that he was no longer there. But then it was an outdoor concert, and it rained through half the amphitheater and not the other half. It was really weird. And so this big, beautiful rainbow showed up over the amphitheater. It was beautiful. And again, it was just another sign from God that he was there and that he was watching and that he knew how I felt, and it was his way of comforting me. It says God will comfort those who mourn, and he does. He does. Even when you're mad at him, even when you don't feel like he has been fair, even when you're hurt, I mean, he understands. He understands that pain, and he's with you. And you may never get the answers as to why it happened, but you have to trust that God knows what he's doing, because he really does. And that pain of losing them is going to last for a long time. But it even says in the Bible, when David lost his son, that I will not go. It says, no, what it says is, he will not come back to me, but I will go to him. It says there right in the Bible, I will go to him. And that's important, because when you lose a child, you're lost. And sometimes it's better to know that it's a temporary separation and not permanent. And that has helped me in all the years to come. And I'll tell you what, that faith in God has helped me in years to come too. I've been through trials just as hard, if not harder, and that faith in God has got me through. I tell you, I wouldn't have been able to do the rest of my life. And some of the things that are just as hard that I've had to do, like the loss of another kid, and the loss of a spouse who is addicted, and just there's other situations that are just hard, that had I not had God, I would have been lost. Like, I don't know how people do it without God. I seriously don't. Because it's depressing. It's depressing to think that you lost a loved one and you can't see him again. It's depressing to think that there's nothing beyond this life, that you just die and everybody forgets you. It's depressing to think that there's no eternity, and I don't know how people can get through life and think that. And it's hard to get through life and not realize that you have a Father in heaven that loves you, that really loves you, no matter what you do or what mistakes you make or all the trials that you've been through, that he loves you and he's there for you with everyone. Because sometimes people are unreliable, and sometimes people walk away, and sometimes they're not there for you and you need them, but God is always there. He is always there, and if you look and you ask for a sign, he will give it to you. But sometimes just having faith enough that he's watching out for you and that he has your best interest in heart, sometimes it's enough, you know. But anyways, I just wanted to tell you my story. I still miss my son, but I know it's a temporary separation, and I will be doing more testimonies that talk about the loss of my daughter and the loss of my late husband and some of the other trials that I've had to go through, which are hard too, and how faith in God got me through. But anyways, that's all I gotta say. Thanks for listening. I hope this leads you to a better relationship with God, because if by sharing these things, it leads just one person to find God or to rely on God more than they already do, then it's worth the pain in relating them. And if you have a story of how God helped you or saved you, then share it, because people need to hear it. And if you don't want to share it on your own, contact me and I'll help you share it, because I think people need to know. But anyways, God bless you, and thank you for listening. Goodbye.